All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anne McCabe, and I am the CEO and a partner here at Curo Private Wealth. And I'm joined by my awesome partner, Atrisa Roberts, who is our Chief Operating Officer of Curo Private Wealth as well. And we're so happy to have you here today. So thank you again for taking the time. Our webinar today is called Personal Finance 101, and the live webinar is exclusive to children and grandchildren of our clients. But for those of you who are not familiar with Curo, I just wanted to do a quick introduction on who we are and what we do. So in our firm, we do comprehensive financial planning as well as proactive investment management. And we are located in the DC metro area. We have two offices. So Atrisa sits in our Rockville, Maryland office, and I sit in our Reston, Virginia office, but we have clients all over the country. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We wanted to take some time to kind of educate the children and grandchildren of our clients around just some of the concepts of managing our personal finances. And it's an unfortunate truth that we don't learn these things in school, right? Teresa, I don't know if you took any, personal finance classes, but it's
Not
not
at
very
all.
common. Yeah. And neither did I. Thankfully, right out of college, started in the field and was able to learn about finance. But unfortunately, it's not something that, most people learn through school. So we wanted to keep it really high level today. Hopefully, we'll share some basic information around making really smart financial decisions. I did want to mention Caroline, our awesome office administrator, is on the Zoom as well, and she's going to be moderating the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat box, and she'll be moderating those and letting us know so that we can answer your questions throughout. We promise to get you out of here by 1 o'clock Eastern. So this will not be longer than an hour, but feel free to pop your questions in there. So Teresa, you want to start sharing your screen, please? All right. Please read the disclosures in full. Got to keep compliance happy. Here is our agenda for our webinar today. So first, we're going to talk about the importance of goal setting. We're then going to talk about putting together a budget, or as we like to call it, a spending plan, building an emergency fund, cash reserves, paying off debt. And then I'm going to turn it over to Atrisa, and she is going to talk about saving for retirement, evaluating whether or not Roth options make sense for you, HSA, which stands for Health Savings Account, overall some investing best practices, some information around 529 plans, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So it's really important before we even talk about the numbers of our financial plan to understand where it is that we want to go. So one of the things we recommend is that everyone sits down, has some quiet time, and just reflects on, where do you think you are financially right now? And more importantly, most importantly, where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be in the future? And when we are coaching clients to do goal setting, we like to break goals down into time periods. So you'll see we have short term goals, which is anywhere in the next 5 years. We have intermediate, which is somewhere between 5 to 10, and then longer term, which is 10 plus. So we have some examples here of goals that we hear clients are working towards in these different time periods, but these are just examples. So please do take some time to sit quietly and think about what are these goals that you are trying to achieve. But some examples that we hear frequently in short term is to create and follow a budget, to build up cash reserves or an emergency fund, to save for fun things like travel, vacations, pay off debt, and maybe even save for your first home. Intermediate, some of the similar things come up, but also maybe we're talking at this point about saving for your children's college education. Maybe you want to start your own business and to start saving for retirement. And then the longer term, 10-year plus, we hear a lot about saving for retirement, or what we like to say, work optional lifestyle. But maybe also you aspire to have a second home in the future, a beach house, lake house, something like that. And then we have ongoing goals that can't really fit nicely into a time period. I would say the most popular ongoing goal that we hear about is making sure that, folks have enough money to take really nice vacations and travel every year. So that's one of those goals that's ongoing. It's not like it's, one time and done. It's something that you want to make sure you have funds allocated for every year. So that's goal setting. So once we have our goals set, the next really important step is to create a budget, or as we like to call it, a spending plan. I think sometimes when we hear about budget, our eyes may roll. It may sound really boring. It's not very exciting or positive, may have some negative connotations to it. But if you think about it as a spending plan, maybe that can motivate you a little bit more to want to put something into place. So, what we're going to go over with you today are three different frameworks you can consider of how to create a budget or a spending plan. And it really doesn't matter which of these frameworks you choose. We would say whichever one resonates with you or seems like it's something that you could implement and stay consistent with, that's the one that we think you should do. So, first, we're going to talk about the 50-30-20 framework. So what we're going to do in this framework is we are going to take our after-tax income, so taxes have already been taken out of our paycheck, and we're going to take whatever's left over, our net income, and we're going to make sure no more than 50% of that net income is going to what we would call essentials, paying our mortgage or our rent, groceries, car payment, those essential expenses. Then we're going to take 30% and we're going to allocate those to needed expenses and discretionary expenses. So we all pretty much at this point need a cell phone, right? Most of us need streaming services too, but the dining out, some of those discretionary purchases are more nice to haves. Okay, so make sure that no more than 30% of your net income is being used on those discretionary and needed expenses. And then with the 20% left over, we're going to allocate that to savings. And it's fine to break up that 20% into short-term savings, like building up your cash reserves or your emergency fund, and also longer term, like retirement or college planning, if that's something that you're doing for your children. So that's the 50-30-20 framework. The next one is called the 60% solution framework. So here, we're talking about our gross income. So that is a distinction I want to mention, is now we're talking gross income, not net after taxes. So we're going to take our gross income and we're going to make sure that no more than 60% is for committed expenses. So examples of committed expenses would be our mortgage or our rent, food, but even things like taxes and insurance. So really any expense that we have that is not discretionary, we want to make sure that's no more than 60%. If you do find that your expenses are currently already over 60% of your gross income, this is where we're going to want to look at your expenses and see if we can peel back on something, see if we can make some changes to our expenses. With the 40% left over, we're going to take 10% and save that for retirement, 10% for short-term savings, like building up that emergency fund or your cash reserve, 10% to longer-term savings. So maybe this is college, or maybe this is saving for a first home or a second home. And then 10% to what we would call fun money, which are the discretionary purchases. Maybe that's eating out, travel, clothing, that kind of thing. So that's the 60% solution. And then the last one is the most straightforward and simple. So if you're like, just, I want a bottom line, savings plan, this is probably the one for you. Really, really straightforward. We're going to take our gross income right off the bat. We're going to pay ourselves first, and we're going to stick 20% of that gross income in savings, and we're going to spend the rest. Maybe one month we spend more on eating out. Maybe another month we spend more on travel. Really doesn't matter. In this framework, you really don't have to get into the nitty gritty. It's about making sure the savings get taken care of first, and then you spend the rest on whatever you want. So we do have a few tools here. A good old-fashioned spreadsheet works great for a spending plan. That's actually personally what I use, but there are some tools online as well. Mint.com is one that we are aware many people use, and YNAB, which stands for You Need a Budget, is another tool that we've gotten really good feedback on. So again, the tool is the least important thing here. The important thing is to come up with a plan and stick with it and be consistent as you possibly can. So next, we're going to talk about building an emergency fund, a cash reserve. So our emergency fund is really going to be the foundation of our financial plan. It's super important to have money set aside in an emergency fund or in cash reserves for those inevitable and unexpected things that always come up. So maybe our water heater breaks at home and we need to replace it. Maybe we need new tires for our car. Maybe we have a medical expense that we obviously didn't plan for that we have to come out of pocket. So there's so many reasons why it's really important to make sure we have enough money set aside in an emergency fund. The number one question we always get is how much is enough? And I'm sure you've heard lots of rules of thumb out there. We would say the absolute minimum anyone should have is 3 months worth of your living expenses. So we do think of your emergency fund as a function of how much are your monthly expenses. So if you have a pretty secure job, you are, maybe employed by the government, for example, 3 months of expenses is probably okay. If you have, let's say you're self-employed or you're in sales where your income goes like this, right? It ebbs and flows. We would want you to pop that up to maybe 6 months to even a year worth of your expenses in a cash reserve. Now, the how is we always recommend to set up systematic savings. So I'm sure you've heard out of sight, out of mind. This is the way that our 401k works, where we set up our contributions, the money comes out of our paycheck and it stays in our 401k and we don't really even miss it. So if you take a similar approach with your savings, you just allocate a certain amount of money every month or every paycheck to your savings. We promise you won't feel it. It's not going to be that painful, and you will start building up your savings in a nice amount of time. The second question is where should those savings go? And we recently saw the FDIC put out, and they do this regularly, the average APY for a bank savings account. APY stands for annual percentage yield. And the average APY of a bank savings account was less than 0.5%. It was like 0.46%. If you look at some online high yield savings accounts, they're paying upwards of 4%. We've seen anywhere from 4.5 to like 5.25, maybe even 5.5% in an online high yield savings account. So there's a huge discrepancy right now between what banks are paying on savings accounts and what you can get in like an online high yield savings. And it's really important for us to take the time to look into these accounts because there's a massive difference in how much interest we can actually earn if we maximize what we're getting on our savings accounts. These online high yield savings accounts are still FDIC insured. They're still liquid. You do have to transfer money, from the online savings to your checking account. But we would say it's well worth doing the extra homework and investing an extra amount of time to find a good online high yield savings account because those interest rates are dramatically different. The other reason we like having your savings in a separate or your cash reserves in a separate account is it's harder to get to, right? So you have to really log on to your account and request the transfer for it to go over to your checking account versus if you're keeping all of your savings in your checking, it's way easier to access. So number of reasons of why we would prefer the online high yield savings account for your emergency fund. Moving on to debt. So because interest rates have come up, it's great from a savings standpoint. It's not so great from a liability or a debt standpoint. So credit card debt is one of the more expensive kinds of debt that we can have. The average credit card interest rate is almost 21% according to Bankrate, and that is as of the end of February. And it's really hard to get out of this credit card debt because what happens is you're making a monthly payment, but so much of that monthly payment is going to interest as opposed to paying off your principal. So if you do have credit card debt, there are a couple different ways that you can approach paying that down, and I'm going to explain the different ways. So the first is called an avalanche method. And in this method, what we do is we make the minimum payments to our credit cards, all of our credit cards, but then with any extra cash flow we have, we send an extra payment to the credit card with the highest interest rate. Once that card is paid off, we cut the card up, right? Don't use it again. And then we go and do the same thing with our next higher card. So let's say we have a credit card that's at 23% interest. That's the one we're going to target first. Once that's done, then we'll go to the card that's at 21% and we'll continue on until we have all of the credit card debt paid off. So that's the avalanche method. The other method is called the snowball method. So similarly, we are going to make the minimum payments to all of our credit cards, but then with the extra money we have, we're actually going to send that extra money to the card with the lowest balance. So we're not going to worry about the interest rate in this method. We're just going to worry about the balance. And from a financial standpoint, it probably makes more sense to do the avalanche method. But with the snowball, what we find is it's so motivating to be able to get these quick wins, right? If you have a card with a couple $1,000s on it, you can pay that off and feel really good about yourself, have motivation, have momentum to keep going. And one of the things that, Atrice and I have learned being in this industry for quite a while is the emotional and the psychological pieces are sometimes even more important than the financial. So that snowball method we've actually seen work quite well because you can get those good feelings, that good juju to continue to pay down that debt. So those are two ways to approach paying down your credit card debt. Next, we have, so this is the last chart I'm going to go over before I turn it over to Atrisa. So this is a really nice prioritization chart. And basically what this does is attempts to help you decide what to do when you have a dollar, okay? Because basically we want to be able to allocate our money in the smartest way possible. So when we have extra funds, we're going to start at the very bottom with number one, which is those emergency reserves or those cash reserves. So we want to make sure we build up a nice liquidity, nice buffer there just in case something happens and we need to access savings. Then we're going to go to number two, which is maximizing any sort of employer match that we may have on our 401k or TSP, any sort of retirement account. So this is free money. If your employer is giving you a match, it is free money, and we like free money. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. Then number three, we are going to tackle those credit cards or any other debt you may have that has a higher interest rate. The reason that we want to simultaneously pay off debt and build up reserves is because in the event that something or when something happens, if you're just exclusively working on paying down debt and you're not working on savings, what's going to happen, I promise you, when an emergency occurs or an unexpected expense occurs, guess how you're going to pay for that? You're going to use those credit cards that you've been working so hard to pay off, and you're going to feel really kind of depleted because you've been working so hard to try to pay off those credit cards. Now, all of a sudden, your balance has increased. So we think it's really important to simultaneously work on paying down the high credit card and building up those reserves, which is why we have paying down credit card as number three. Then we're going to move to number four, which is a health savings account. These are very powerful from a tax standpoint. It's one of the only investment accounts that exists that is triple tax free. So we get a tax deduction when we put the money in, we get tax deferred growth, and then assuming we use it for qualified medical expenses, it's also tax free on the distribution. So make sure you check that out if you have that available to you with your employers. Then we're going to go to more 401k or more retirement savings. So the maximum employee contribution that you can fund for 2024 is $23,000 if you are under the age of 50 and $30,500 if you are over the age of 50. So we want to try to max those contributions out. Then we're going to go to paying down lower interest rates. So say you have a student loan with a nice low interest rate locked in, that's going to be next. Number 7 is going to be an IRA contribution. So you are able to make IRA contributions even when you are making a 401k contribution. And then lastly, we're huge fans of having just non-retirement investment accounts, what we call taxable or non-qualified accounts. So that would be number 8 of how we would prioritize your cash flow, your savings, as well as paying down debt. So I'm going to turn it over to Atrisa to start talking about retirement and investing.
Good afternoon. So as we start to look at retirement, we want to start to focus in on those things that what Ann and I like to call within our sphere of control. So there are things that we can control, things that we cannot, and then there are some things that we can maintain some control of. So as you start to think about retirement, there are going to be things that are just completely out of your control, nothing you can do to make it different. Those things are market returns. As much as we would love to have a crystal ball to know what they're going to be and maybe be able to manipulate them, we can't. So we want you to be less worried about what the market does from quarter to quarter or from year to year. Other things like tax policy and maybe even the benefits policy that your employer offers are all things that you cannot control. Then there are things that you have some control over. Earnings during your employment period. You can always change careers, attempt to earn more money, get more education. How long you work, you have some control over. Again, there are things that happen outside that we can't control, like health issues, family situations that may lengthen or shorten that time, but you do maintain some control of that. And of course, longevity, which we don't know when the end of our lives will be, but we do know that we can contribute in ways to help prolong our lives as much as possible. What we want to focus on as we start to think about retirement are those things that are 100% totally in our control. And as Ann already shared, savings versus spending is something that is an us thing. We can determine how much we're saving every month or every year and how much we are spending. And of course, we have various different ways we can plan to do that and frameworks, but the important is that we take control of it and we focus in on that as we plan for retirement. The other thing that we can control is how our money is invested, asset allocation, how much are we owning in cash versus stocks and bonds, and what investment vehicles or where that money is invested. So as you start to think about long-term retirement planning, we want you to make sure that most of your focus is on those things that you absolutely have 100% control of. So now this may be a little frightening, but this is a retirement savings checkpoint. And what we're looking at on this chart is how much in savings you should have accumulated given your income and age. So we want to look at them as a cross section. This is looking at total household income that is greater than $100,000. Your age is running here on our y-axis, household income on our x. So for example, I am 41 years old, so I would fall into this range. And depending on my income, this would tell me in thousands how much we should have saved by that point. Now, this is going to assume a few things. We're assuming that your savings rate is at 10%, that you are invested in a 60-40 or moderate type portfolio. We're assuming a lower inflation than maybe what we've seen over the last few years over the long term of 2.5%, and assuming a retirement age of 65 with years in retirement at 35 or living to age 100. There is another underlying assumption that there is an appropriate amount of income replacement that comes from Social Security. So we want you to use these types of charts as checkpoints to see how close you are to the goal, how far away you might be. This is also assuming that you want to maintain a lifestyle in retirement that is similar to the one that you have now. So if you're eating out a lot now at your current income level, you want to continue to dine out in retirement like me, eating out is a hobby. These are the checkpoints that we want you to judge by. And this may actually be a good framework for deciding, do I need to be spending less now? Should I be more aggressive in my savings plan? So while these are not hard and fast numbers, we treat them like checkpoints or benchmarks to determine how well we're doing in moving toward our retirement savings goals. So this is talking about savings rates based on age and income, and these are for household income levels that are under 90,000. So Anne already went through some savings goals from a percentage, but this is showing how much you should be saving at various ages and income levels, depending on where you want to be in retirement. So for a 40-year-old who is earning $60,000, you should right now have a 13% savings rate as your goal for savings each year. So whether you choose to do that in a simple framework or in a 50, 30, 20, all of these would allow you to meet those different savings rates goals every year. And of course, we're keeping the same assumptions that you're wanting to live a lifestyle in retirement that is similar to the one you are living today. So now this one, I think, is one of the more important things that we can talk about when we start talking about savings. There is an extreme benefit to starting your savings early and to saving consistently. So what you're looking at here, our top blue line is the ideal situation, showing an investor that started saving at age 25 and was doing it consistently. That investor over that 40-year period actually earned 7% per year, and in a portfolio that started at $0 at age 65 is now $512,000. That is the benefit of investing as early as possible. And we can see the difference in how that portfolio might change if you start investing a little bit later. So even a 10-year delay, so from 25 years of age to 35 years of age, of your over lifetime, and this is the purple line you see on this chart, over those 40 years, you have now reduced the growth or the potential growth of that portfolio by almost 50%. So there is a benefit to what we think of as time in the market. Many people want to time or talk about timing the market. We don't want to time it. We want to have time in. So the sooner that you can start and begin investing, that long-term compounding return is going to have such a significant impact on your retirement savings over 20, 30, or 40 years. So Anne did make reference to the benefits of evaluating or investing in a Roth IRA at different life stages. Now, I do think it might be helpful. It is helpful to just give a little context in the difference between a traditional and a Roth. So traditional IRAs are funded with pre-tax dollars. So when you invest in those, for most investors, you receive a tax deduction for making those contributions up to a certain dollar amount. It means you're allowed to grow those assets tax deferred until the time you start to pull them out. Roth IRAs are funded with after-tax dollars. So you receive no tax deduction for contributing to a Roth. Now, it doesn't work for everyone because there are income limitations to who can contribute to a Roth. So typically the advice is that you start contributing to a Roth account in lower income years when you are younger, and then transition to traditional IRA contributions in your higher income years. But what this does over the long term and into retirement is allow you to continue to grow your retirement access tax deferred, but also offers the benefit of not paying taxes on it during retirement. So the more that you can fund into a Roth in your early lower income years, and then of course you can work with advisors like us to talk about when it's appropriate to maybe start making that conversion from from traditional to Roth at different points in your life. But the idea is that while you may assume that in retirement, you will be in a lower income tax bracket, most people assume that because they say, hey, I've stopped working, I'm going to have less ordinary income, I won't pay as much in taxes. But if you have accumulated a lot of retirement assets in a traditional IRA, at some point, the IRS is going to come for their portion of that. And when you start to make distributions, it creates ordinary income for you, which may not reduce your tax bracket as much as you think it would in retirement. So a Roth can be a very powerful tool, especially when you start evaluating the use of it early in your income earning years. And also made reference to the benefits of a health savings account, which again, we always know it's our triple tax advantage savings. Now, this option is available through most employer benefit packages if you are enrolled in a high deductible medical plan. So not if you have a PPO, you may not have access to an HSA. You would have other options potentially like an FSA. But for people who have access to a health savings account, these can be incredibly impactful to helping you to grow more assets through retirement or through your earning years for retirement in a tax deferred way. So you get the tax deduction or the tax benefit by contributing to one. The money grows tax deferred. And as long as you're pulling the money out for qualified health expenses, you pay no taxes on those. So they become a almost tax-free investment for you through the life. There's also a newer strategy now that is becoming very popular where people are treating their HSA as just an investment vehicle. And more HSA providers are allowing options for you to actually own different investments in your HSA other than just cash. So depending on your provider, you could have the opportunity to actually make an investment choice in the HSA. So we want to encourage you to explore this option and to look into the benefits if it is one that is available to you. So now we've talked about the importance of building up a really good cash reserve or emergency fund reserve, but there is also a downside to having too much cash. And the way the slide is titled, cash is not always king. So while we have different savings goals for should I have 3 months of expenses or 6 or a year, once you have started to hit those emergency funding and high yield savings account goals, now it's time to turn your attention to how to make the money work best for you over time. And if you start with $1, like we look at, and this again is going back to 1802, but if you had started with just $1 in 1802 and just held on to that dollar through last year, your dollar at that time would now be worth 4 cents. And the reason, of course, for that is because of inflation, right? The inflationary cost, things get more expensive. So the value of your dollar goes down as things get pricier. We can see different asset classes as well, bonds and T-bills and cash. But the important story here is the power of stock investing and owning stock in your portfolio. If you had taken that same dollar in 1802, as of last year, that investment would now be worth 1.7, almost $1.8 million. So over the long term, stocks are always gonna outperform cash, bonds, T-bills, gold. Now, again, that doesn't mean you won't experience short-term volatility. There will be years like 2022, which is right there in our recent memory, where stocks will not have a great year. But over the long run, stocks are always going to outperform other asset classes. So don't keep the money stuffed in the mattress. Don't be afraid to get into the market. Remember, it's not about timing the market, it's about our time in the market. And again, here's another side to that story, and that's the impact of being out of the market. And as advisors, we had a lot of these conversations around our clients' behaviors during challenging market times. So it is a natural human response, I think, to want to start to divest yourself of the market when things get choppy and get challenging. We saw many investors face this in 2020 during the COVID lockdown. We saw the market fall off very steeply. Many people, natural human reaction was to say, let's get out now. And again, that's based on our aversion to loss. Most people, I think, are more averse to losing things than they are to actually gaining or winning. So from a human discipline and behavior standpoint, it's very easy to react emotionally to when markets are choppy. Our encouragement to you as advisors is to maintain a disciplined approach to the way that you invest. We understand that there's going to be volatility, markets are going to go up and down, but again, missing even the 10 best days in the market can have a dire impact on how your portfolio recovers over the long term. So if you were to remain fully invested, and this is going back the last 20 years from January of 2004 to December of 23, you would have a return in the S&P 500 of almost 10%. Had you missed just the best 10 days of any of those 20 years, you would have half the return that you would have gotten had you just stayed in the market. So we want you to think about it as a disciplined approach. Don't let your emotions lead and rule. Remember, it's about my time in. I can ride this out. Keep a long-term perspective to the way you think of investing in the market. Now, here is an option for investors who either have children or children in their lives who they're wanting to help plan for their higher education expenses. And it is the benefit of a 529 plan. This plan is a tax advantaged way of saving for education specifically. So while you don't get the benefit of any sort of deduction on contributing to a 529 for your children or grandchildren, it is a way to grow any contributions you make tax deferred, similar to the way you would do in a Roth IRA. And over time, these assets, of course, get the benefit of long-term compounding. And then once withdrawn, or if withdrawn for education expenses, you also get to take that money out tax-free. So that means there's never any tax on the earnings that you've accumulated in these plans. It's a good option for gifting. So if your children or you're planning for retirement and the grandparents are looking for ways to pitch in, or cousins want to give gifts, tell them we don't need any more video games, no more Roblox. Just write a check to my child's 529, because these can have an immense advantage to helping you plan and save for retirement. And again, for education expenses. And we know how expensive college has gotten. So the earlier you can start to take advantage of the long-term compounding of the tax deferred advantage, the more you can accumulate over time in order to pay for college. 529s now also have an allowance that allow you to pay for private school education as well, up to $10,000 a year. So we know there are many private schools here in our local area that students attend. You can use up to $10,000 of the 529 to fund private school, even in primary and high school education as well, from the 529 plans. And again, already mentioned using it for education expenses, but some of the things that qualify are tuition and fees, room and board, apprenticeship programs, even computers and related equipment, books and supplies. So these are all what are considered qualified expenses for use of the 529 to be able to take advantage of the tax-free distributions. Again, I mentioned you can also cover K through 12 tuition at private institutions. And if you have a child or know a child that has some special needs, you can also use 529s to help provide for special needs services. And then with the new Secure Act 2.0, there are now also some new advantages, because I know many people are hesitant and they say, well, what if they don't go to college? What if I've accumulated all of this money and then my child becomes a world famous entertainer? So there are options now for either, again, we've always had the option to transfer 529s to other related beneficiaries, but now Secure Act 2.0 has allowed for us to be able to do some conversions of 529s into Roth IRAs for those beneficiaries as well, if they don't use them for college or if they have money left over after uses for college. And again, I think I predated or was too early on the slide, but this is new, just starting this year. Now, there are some guidelines around the ability to be able to convert to a Roth. Again, the beneficiary of the 529 does still have to qualify for Roth contributions. So they will have to have some earned income, and then you will have to have had the money invested in the 529 for a certain number of years. And then again, you would still be subject to the Roth contribution limits every year. So you couldn't take the full value of what's there and do a 100% conversion. You would still have to meet the guidelines for Roth contributions and limitations. So that brings us to the end of our presentation here. Again, we thank you all for your time and attention. We will address your questions, but I do want to note that there are ways you can stay connected with us here. So please connect with us on Facebook, on YouTube, follow our YouTube channel, visit our website. Ann and I are both on LinkedIn, so look us up.
All right.
So,
thanks,
all right.
Teresa.
Of course. So now, Ann, it looks like I have a question and...
Yeah, and actually the question is referencing the Virginia deduction for 529 plans. And one of the questions that we got sent in ahead of time was also asking a question specifically about the Virginia 529. So if you live in Virginia and you open a Virginia 529 plan, excuse me, you are able to deduct up to $4,000 per account. So per beneficiary per year on your Virginia tax return. So it's not a federal deduction, but it is a state deduction. And one of the things that we recommend for clients to consider is to open two 529 plans with, the mom and dad, for example, with the same beneficiary or same child, because that will double the deduction that you are eligible to take on your Virginia return. And Maryland, I think, is $2,500, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so it's
Yes.
$2,500 per beneficiary per account. So that was the question on the Virginia 529. The other question we get frequently on the different state 529 plans is, does my child have to go to, for example, a Virginia school or a Maryland school? And the answer is no. With the investment related 529 plans, they can go anywhere, as long as it's accredited educational institution, and that would be a qualified expense. So they don't have to go to a Virginia or a Maryland state school for you to be able to use those savings for their education.
So you
All
are
right.
yeah, you are
Yeah.
welcome to drop any questions in the chat. If there's anything that may have popped up in the last few moments, we're happy to address them.
Yeah, one of the other questions we got ahead of time was about just investment strategies for a young adult. And so the chart that Atrisa went over that shows the long-term chart of stocks versus bonds and cash and gold, we would say that, assuming your time horizon is long and you're a young investor, we would encourage you to be very heavily weighted, if not 100% in stocks, because of this chart right here, and just because of what we know about the long-term returns in the stock market. So anything you would add there, Teresa?
No, I mean, I completely agree. And I think even more so in retirement accounts. So as you're making contributions to your retirement plans, as a young investor or a young adult, you really can't access that money without penalty, without some exceptions, obviously. So if you think of that money as something that I can't even touch for the next 30 years, then you absolutely should lean into stocks, because now you've got a 30-year time horizon to manage that volatility that stocks could have in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. And when the markets are going crazy and there's volatility, we actually want you to get excited about that. I know this sounds crazy, but when you're hanging out at the water cooler and your friends are telling you that they stopped their 401k contributions because the market's down, or they went to cash because the market's down, you know better than that now, and you're going to say something along the lines of, "Oh man, I'm like leaning in, right? I'm buying when things are on sale." Think of the stock market as any other market, right? So if you go into the grocery store and one of your favorite foods is on sale, you're more likely to buy more of it. But we don't think of the stock market in the same way. Most people, when the stock market is on sale, they want to run away, right? They don't want to buy more, they want to cash out. It doesn't logically make sense, but it's that human behavior that Atrisa was mentioning, and the way that our mind works, just trying to protect us. So if you are a young investor, and especially as Atrisa mentioned with your retirement accounts, get excited about the market being down. It is so good when you are in the accumulation phase for the market to be down. It's not good for our clients who are in the distribution phase. If they're no longer earning income and they're no longer saving, we don't, they're not super excited, but we want you to be excited when the market is down, because it means, more bang for your buck, you're
Yeah.
buying more shares on sale.
Yeah. And I know that we think theoretically about investing as buying low and selling high, but just remember, the market has to give us a low to be able to buy in at the low. So like Ann mentioned, get excited about that opportunity when there is a pullback, and especially the power of consistent investing when markets are pulling back. We think about the advantage we get when we call it dollar cost averaging. But if you have some sort of systematic plan where you're buying in at periodic frequencies, that means you're taking advantage of buying opportunities when there are those times when stocks are on sale. So remember, consistency is key as well.
Yes, absolutely. All right, last call for any additional questions. Hopefully it means we covered so thoroughly everything,
We were
Teresa, that
thorough.
folks don't have questions. All right. Well, seeing none, I think we can close out, and just thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We hope this was beneficial and educational, and we very much would appreciate feedback If you want us to do things like this in the future or any other sort of educational webinars, please feel free to reach out to us, and definitely follow us on social media. I'm sick of my 12-year-old making fun of the fact that we only have like 30 followers on YouTube. He's used to seeing like millions. So help us out here. All right.
Help us
So we
out.
can, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And we are also recording this presentation. So we know you may know people or have children who weren't able to attend live. So we will have this recorded and be able to share so that you can share it with those who are interested but couldn't join us today.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Take
much.
care. We'll
Have
see
a
you
wonderful
soon.
day.